I made a rough list of 5 categories that I thought would be terms or locations for a shakeup that might happen if your work became basic to a lot of Western thought. And I named the category number 5, Western philosophy and metaphysics. I do think that a thorough shakeup of the category of religion and one of its putative opposites, that is, the secular, would disturb the commonplace notion of the separation of materiality and spirituality. Religion, in both its institutional and non-institutional incarnations, gets equated with vague and slippery concepts such as spirituality and transcendence. The material, secular, everyday world becomes lifeless, dull, and rigid in comparison. According to the philosopher Geraldine Finn, the language of spirituality aspires to a being otherwise than being in and of the material world. This otherworldliness is expressed in a series of binary oppositions, such as soul and body, self and other, man and woman, that's a very important one, nature and culture, by means of which relations of ruling are rationalized and reproduced. Thus is the complex reality of material being falsified by being split off from its most creative and potentially subversive possibilities. She writes, this postulate of an immaterial and transcendent soul, spirituality, or otherness secures the quiddity of the material world as it is, and at the same time the safety of the political status quo that organizes it. Our yearning for a being otherwise than being, our desire for expression of the mystery and excess that we feel in relationships and experience, is appropriated by the language of religion and spirituality, siphoned off and dissipated. I think Balagangadhara is referring to such a depletion of ordinary life in the West when he writes, as intellectual energies shifted to locating the rational bases of social and human life, the transmission of practical or performative knowledge was arrested, impeded, lost all significance, and became secondary. The practical life and interactions of a people correspondingly and over a period of time became impoverished. Theories grew rich and sophisticated, daily life barren and poor. Imagine no religion, John Lennon said in a song. In their different ways and in different degrees, Balagangadhara, I think Timothy Fitzgerald, and also Russell McCutcheon are singing a similar lyric, a lyric that invokes the intellectual adventure that Susan Sontag described as a quest for ways of thinking we don't know about yet. So that was how I was thinking just before I got on the plane to come here, and I was so glad to hear you end your talk on this, dreaming about a being otherwise than being, that at least we could perhaps glimpse when some of these sedimented ways of thinking are disturbed. So I wondered whether you might have any comments about that.
I'm deeply touched. More for your gracious remarks. Nothing more.
Well, they're your words. Maybe that has something to do with it.
I don't really have anything to add to Balu's talk because I think it was its own way of expressing his ideas, and I thought it was full of insights and things which I felt a lot of sympathy for. If I was going to just pick on one issue, which is more of an exploration of something which I think Balu said, it was that these binaries are created by religion itself. Is that what you related that to the point that we were discussing yesterday about the way in which 17th century writers, philosophers, thinkers, whatever we should call them. I mentioned John Locke and William Penn. They were trying to think new thoughts, I think, at the time. And I think the new thought that they were trying to think was that the current dominant orthodox idea of religion, which is an all-encompassing Christian truth, and in England it was a Protestant Christian truth, which had transformed Catholics into the whores of Babylon, you know, the archetypal superstitious barbarians. That the new thought that they were trying to think was that actually religion has nothing to do with government, with the magistrate. I don't think that either Locke or Penn had clearly distinguished between the state and civil society at that stage. Though somebody might correct me on that point, but that's my reading of it. But that they were trying to have new thoughts, but at the same time, so they were initiating a rhetoric, a new rhetoric, for certain very complex reasons, which we could go into. But as perhaps with all rhetoric, there was also a necessity to make their new thoughts look as though they had always been true, but had been covered up. Because if you can make it look as though they've always been true, but somebody else has subsequently come along and put a full spin on them, then you can claim to be going back to some kind of an original truth, reclaiming an original truth. And the way they did this, with this distinction between religion as a private, voluntary faith in God and an afterlife on the one hand, and the magistrate or politics, they also use that term, as public, obligatory, and with the legitimate means of violence to enforce obedience, which was also the state. They went back to the Gospels and they said, but look, this is what Jesus taught. Jesus taught exactly this, because Jesus said, give unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. Therefore, what the Catholic Church has done is covered over this pristine truth which was uttered by Jesus Christ our Lord and is recorded in the Gospels. And we are now trying to recapture that original pristine truth and reissue it into the world. And so this would be a way of legitimating what, in my argument, became the religion-secular dichotomy. And I think Balu was referring to that, probably. My problem is, I mean, first of all, I think that the kind of sayings that you find in the Bible about, on the one hand, the sacredness of God, and on the other hand, the profanity of this world, was actually not the same distinction as the modern religion-secular distinction, even though it might have been used to legitimate it. I think it was a different kind of distinction, and that what people like Locke and Penn did was to decontextualize from a completely different ancient biblical world, the world of the Gospels, and try and use it to legitimate a quite modern idea, which was the religion-secular dichotomy. But I don't think that I would want to say that the religion-secular dichotomy in its modern sense was actually itself produced by religion, because you see, I don't think that it was. I think that they attempted to legitimate it by an appeal to the Gospels, but I think that what they were actually doing was creating an entirely new, different concept of religion, a modern generic category, which is the one which has become the dominant discourse of our times.